Hello, folks. This is Nate. Was talking with some friends recently about. There was a question posted about why is everybody acting so crazy, basically, with all the world that's going on with riots and people are so bitter and nasty. And I was thinking that I would just give my quick opinion and my speculations as to why this bitterness over the last few years, and it's just getting worse and worse. So I'm going to jump right into it. I'm going to take you to the first I'm going to take you to Revelation chapter 8, because I know everybody's interested in Bible prophecy. So let's go there first. And Revelation chapter 8, verse 11. Okay, then, and this is concerning the seals of Yahweh. Then a third angel sounded, so that if this is, my speculations are correct, this would be the third seal. And a great star fell from heaven, burning like a torch, and it fell on a third of the rivers and on the springs of water. The name of the star is wormwood, okay? And it's bitterness, and it will come to this. A third of the waters became wormwood, and many men died from the water because it was made bitter. Okay, so that's one verse in Revelation prophecy. Now let's go to Deuteronomy chapter 29. And verse 18. Let's start at 14 though. I make this covenant and this oath. Now you have to take in the whole context of verse 29, but we don't have time to read all of it, so I would recommend that you go back and you read the whole of Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. That's going to be your base and foundation of Yahweh's instructions for His people. So if you're part of the nation of Israel, I'm not going to get into all that. You should know these instructions, okay? All right, so verse 14. I make this covenant and this oath, not with you alone, but with him who stands here with us today before Yahweh your Elohim, as well as with him who is not here with us today, which would be us. Okay, for you know that we dwelt in the land of Egypt. Yes, we have been in Egypt, and that's a whole other story as well. And that we came through the nations which you passed by. And you saw their abominations and their idols which were among them, wood and stone and silver and gold, so that there may not be among you man or woman or family or tribe whose heart turns away today from Yahweh your Elohim, which means turning away from His ways and the way He expects to be worshipped and His commandments, and turning towards other idols and other gods that tell you not to do what God said. Okay, so, and to go and serve the gods of these nations, and that there may not be among you a root bearing bitterness or wormwood. Okay, and so it may not happen when he hears the words of this curse that he blesses himself in his heart, saying, I shall have peace, even though I follow the dictates of my heart. A lot of people will say, oh, but he knows my heart, I don't have to do what he says. No, that's a wrong way of thinking. Sorry. As though the drunkard could be included with the sober. Okay? All right, so, and then we can go to Jeremiah. Let's see, Jeremiah chapter 9, and let's start at verse 13. And Yahweh said, because they have forsaken my law, which I set before them, and have not obeyed my voice, nor walked according to it, but they have walked according to the dictates of their own hearts, and after the Baals, which their fathers taught them. Therefore thus says Yahweh of hosts, the God of Israel, behold, I will feed them, this people, with wormwood, and give them water of gall to drink. I will scatter them also among the Gentiles, whom neither they nor their fathers have known, and I will send a sword after them until I have consumed them. So that's dealing with the 10 northern tribes being scattered, so on and so forth. So this has happened before. So, and we know that Yahweh's ways are cyclical. So, whether there was a comet and all that stuff, I don't know. But wormwood has to deal with bitterness. Now, that comet Ison that came through in the year 2012 was noticed in 2012 during the last day of Sukkot, or the Feast of Tabernacles. And then it was supposed to crash into the sun in the year 2013. It came around, everybody was watching it, and then nothing happened. So there was a lot of speculation on the Earth at that time that this comet was going to crash into the Earth, cause this big upheaval, cause earthquakes, people are going to die. It could be the end of the Earth, especially among evangelicals. And if there were people prophesying at that point in time that these things were going to happen, they are false prophets, especially if they were setting dates. So anyway, you should leave them alone and find somebody who's not doing that, i.e. Jonathan Kahn. All right, so nothing happened, or did something happen? Was it just a sign in the heavens to tell us, look, especially when Yeshua mentions in Matthew 24:25, and then there's also in 2 Thessalonians chapter 2, where Yeshua warns us and says, notice that I'm warning you ahead of time that these things are going to come on the earth. And it has to do with a great falling away. It has to do with the tribulation, so on and so forth, in which case I've got some ideas about that too, some speculations. If you want to just look through my videos, you'll find them. But what if something did happen? What if this spirit that's been there has been kind of dormant, and this was a sign to allow this fourth seal to be opened, and that this people would be more prone to bitterness, or be allowed to express their bitterness. And when you go back to Revelation, it talks about a torch fell on a third of the rivers. Now, rivers in the book of Revelation can mean rivers, but it can also mean people who are kind of the movers of, society, those kind of things. And then the waters could be just the abundance of people, the population of the people. So if the bitterness fell on these leaders, and then they started pushing their agenda on the people, well, we can see that in our populations, whether you're in the United States or in other countries. So this bitterness would poison the leadership, but then also poison the waters, or the bodies of waters, or the people. And a third of the waters became wormwood. So we know that not everybody is bitter, but we know there's quite a few people that are causing problems for the whole world, even though it's a small amount of the population. It could be like 1/3. I don't know. I don't have a way to take count. And many men died from the water. So death can mean physical death, which is obvious, or it can mean a spiritual death. And I think both of those things are happening with all this bitterness. I mean, just look at the news. My case in point is that if you go back to Genesis, where Satan is tempting Adam and Eve, you won't surely die in the day that you eat of it. But they actually did. If you count a day as 1,000 years, they did die within that 1,000 year time frame. So according to Scripture, so they did die. But also we have to look at they did die a physical death, but we also have to look at a spiritual death, a separation from Yahweh. Their relationship with Him changed dramatically at that point in time. So we have to look at the spiritual that was going on as well. So a separation from Yahweh can also be declared as a death. And many men died from the water because it was made bitter. Okay, so I think we're seeing all of those things being played out in our society, in our world today, with this bitterness that's going on. So you can look at, especially if we're turning away from Yahweh and His commands. So How can we defeat this bitterness? How can we rise above it? Well, to love your neighbor as yourself would be a good one. That's a good place to start, because people are so into themselves and how they feel and how their opinions matter and how everything should change according to the ways that they think. But if we start to think about each one of us as important as ourselves, then the bitterness starts to decrease because we start serving each other, we start caring for each other, we have concern for each other. It's the opposite of what bitterness is. We should be thankful for our friends and our families and all those around the world, especially those even sometimes are even harder to love. And maybe if we start showing that, then things might change. The more important of those two things is if we start changing our bitterness towards God, instead towards the love of God. And what does Yahweh say about His love? If you love me, keep my commandments. And if you're keeping His commandments, you're perpetuating the thankfulness, the loving your neighbor. It's all about, the commandments are about loving your neighbor and loving Him. So if you look at the 10 commandments, you have 6 commandments that deal with loving your neighbor, and then you have 4 commandments that have to deal with loving Him. Now there's more for us loving each other because we're harder to get along with each other, where Yahweh is much simpler. It's very basic. But then you have another 613 written throughout the books of Genesis through Deuteronomy that give detail about how to love your neighbor and how to love Yahweh. So if we start turning away from our wicked ways and idols and things in our lives that take away from worshiping Him, and start learning about His feasts and His Sabbath and just how He says to worship Him, then the bitterness can be taken out of us, I believe. I think a hyssop, like the bitter well that was in the desert. We're in a desert right now, spiritually. So if we take His Spirit upon us, it would be like the hyssop being put into the well, the bitter well in the book of, I forget what book it is, but they were in the desert, and the waters were drinkable again. So with that, I hope I was able to get you to think. This is my speculation of why there's so much bitterness. I think it's a sign that Yahweh has told us about, and it's bound to happen. It's probably going to get worse. And is there a potential that earthquakes could come on the land and major catastrophes and all that? That's also possible. I know that the world is not going to end because the New Jerusalem is coming to the earth. We're not going to heaven. A lot of people think we're going to heaven. We're not going to heaven. The earth is still going to be here. We're going to repopulate the earth. And we're going to have a lot of cleaning up to do, I think. So, but that's a whole nother video. So I hope this video caused you to think. And I hope you're having a wonderful week. Sukkot is right around the corner. And I'm looking forward to gathering with my friends and family on that week, during that week. It's in October this year, so dress warm. We're going south, but shalom.